I'm not going to good at pronouncing names. Plus, I am not a Trotskyist, but this is a bit of the Trotskyist thing, I think, because we're reading about C.L.R. James. We're trying to learn who C.L.R. James is. We also know that C.L.R. James is not a Trotskyist. He moved away from it for particular reasons. All right. Trotsky's place in history. The bourgeoisie, perforced, lacking historical methods and suborning all aspects of life, and the maintenance of power, maintenance of power, maintenance of power, has not only confused the proletariat, but has confused itself in the estimation of what constitutes greatness in contemporary men. Woodrow Wilson, Poincare, Stanley Baldwin, and similar critics. Oh, I don't know this word. Come on, there we go. MEDIOCRITIES. Mediocrities. Okay, sorry. Mediocrities have all been crowned with the laurel, not including Nicholas Murphy Butler, on the score, presumably, that he dined often with others. So often and so conspicuously have the bourgeois theorists blundered that in the face of a skeptical world, they confess bankruptcy, always to their biographies and, oh my gosh, our obituaries. Notice oh my gosh, I don't know this word. Let me look at this word. This is not going too well so far. Hello? OBITUAR. There it is. Of course, it's not going to let me say it. Obituary. Obituary. I think so. Notice they added a saving clause. The propensity alone can tell us. No such. Oh my gosh. Now I gotta look up this other word. Jesus Christ. Not having a good day right now. So not starting off with a good thing. Tendaciously? Oh, we're gonna look it up. Of course, it won't let me say it out loud. God damn it. Come on. Watch a YouTube. Sorry.
I just followed my gut for the road.
Tendentiousness.
What the fuck? Tangentiousness. Which means the quality of expressing a strong based point of view, particularly on a controversial subject. Jesus, the words are killing me again. They're killing me today. All right. Hesitancy, hit or miss judgment have discredited the estimate of those who use the method of historical materialism. Marx and Engels judged their contemporaries, Darwin, Proudhon, Abraham Lincoln, Napoleon III, Balzac, and Dickens, Palmerston, Gladstone, Thiers, Bismarck, Shaw, with excessiveness and precision, and their judgments have stood the test of time. The most famous of all their pronouncements on persons, Engels' judgment on Marx, quote, "Mankind is shorter by a head, and the greatest head of our time at that, would have seemed presumptuous to many, and usually exaggeration of a friend, a collaborator, and a communist fanatic. Today, that judgment might be questioned by some, but with caution and respect. Marx's name rings incessantly in the ears of all, capitalists and workers alike. His book, Capital, is high on the sale list of popular classics. Stanley Baldwin, the English Prime Minister, on his retirement indicated that he considered the main characteristics of his period. Quote, "In the year that I was born, two events occurred which were the beginning of the new forces competing in the world today. The one was Disraeli's Reform Bill, with its doctrine of expanding freedom, and on the other, the publication of Capital, with its doctrine of economic determinism." Thus, Marx had at last arrived being recognized as a world force by a conservative prime minister only 50 years after his death. Trotsky is easier to recognize immediately. All men, Marxist or otherwise, will agree that between 1917 and 1923, he played a great role in the history of our times. Before that, his life had made no exceptional impressions on the general consciousness. During his last decades, he was an exile, apparently powerless. During those same 10 years, Stalin, his rival, assumed power such as no man in Europe since Napoleon was wielded. Schmittler has shaken the world and bids fair to bestride it like a colossus while he lasted. Roosevelt is the most powerful president who has ever ruled America. America today is the most powerful nation in the world. Yet the Marxist judgment of Trotsky is as confident as Engels' judgment of Marx. Before this period of power, during it, and after his fall, Trotsky stood second only to Lenin among contemporary men, and after Lenin died in 1924, was the greatest head of our times. That judgment we leave to history. The theory of permanent revolution. Let's find out what this is about. This is the first time we're going to figure it out. Trotsky's first claim to the attention of mankind is his theory of permanent revolution. And if he had fallen dead after correcting the last proof over 30 years ago, his place in political thought was safe. Marx and Engels for 50 years had made their profound and brilliant prediction of the future disintegration of capitalist society. Engels in 1887 had predicted the 1924 war, the revolution in Russia first, the revolution in Europe, the crowns rolling with no one to pick them up, and in formation of a third international. In 1989, Plekhanov declared that the coming revolution in Russia would be a revolution of the working class and could be no other. But in 1905, Trotsky, then 26 years old, in an essay of a few thousand words, unfolded the course which history was to follow. Let us consider the mental climate of that period. Previous to that time, 1905, Europe and America had seen no revolution of any importance since the Civil War of 1861 and the Commune of 1871. The Civil War was not then recognized for what it was, and what Charles Beard has since called it the Second American Revolution. The Commune, except to be Marxist and the French bourgeoisie, have seemed an unpleasant episode growing out of the war. In 1905, the scepter of communism was not haunting Europe. The bourgeois writers and statesmen of those days, Viscount Bryce, the expert on democracy, Maximilian Hardin, Lloyd George, Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Benito Caraco, Anatolia France, Melikoff, and Manchester Guardian, the New York Times, the London Times, the Carrier del Sierra, all of the finest bourgeois thinkers and the distinguished organs of bourgeois thought, that the monumental pile of rubbish and nonsense they they, reactionaries and progressives, were produced in this very 1905 about the world and its future. They and their successors are a little more sensible today, though to do them justice, they lie more from those bourgeois who took notice of it. The theory met with derision. Melikov, the Russian savant, gave it the name, and thus Trotskyism was born. Despite all the evidence piled up under his eyes, the bourgeois of today cannot accept the theory, far less the bourgeois in 1905. Capitalism and this theory was approaching its end, and society was ripe for the socialist revolution. This view Trotsky held in common, apparently, but only apparently, with all Marxists. But, and here he broke sharply with all of them, Lenin included, Russia, the most backward of the great European states, would be the scene for the first socialist revolution, where all the great European Marxists looked upon the coming Russian Revolution as one which would give Russia a bourgeois republic. Trotsky stated that this was impossible. A revolution in Russia, to be successful, would have to be a socialist revolution. True, Russia, a backward country with 100 million peasants, was not ready for socialism. Left to itself, the Russian Revolution would certainly collapse. But the Russian Revolution would unloose proletarian revolution in Europe, which would come to the assistance of the Russians. It would initiate the era of permanent social revolution until the establishment of worldwide socialism. Either this or the collapse of capitalist civilization into barbarism. The analytical power of imaginative audacity, the theory, is one of the most astounding productions of the modern mind. The bourgeoisie makes a great to-do about the Tocqueville, who foresaw that America would one day free itself from England. Goethe, who recognized the significance of the Valmy, and Stuart, who foretold, quote, the irrepressible conflict, who pitiable. These are besides the work of Trotsky, who foretold the future of the world. Except in the work of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, there is no comparable piece of political prophecy anywhere. After Marx's political thinkers are limited to the use of his method. It has never been better used. As for the bourgeoisie, its writings of 1905 remind us of the day when all the young men were for Racine. So remote are they from the trouble modern reality. Hey, what's up? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The verdict of the years. What is more important for us than the limitation of the bourgeoisie is the limitation of the Marxists. They wrote and taught the socialist revolution, but we know today that in reality Kautsky, for instance, did not believe in any such thing. Trotsky himself relates the deadly politeness of the Austro-Marxists, Austro-Marxists. When in exile in Vienna, he ventured to suggest to them the coming collapse of the world they knew. Such was 1905. In the genuinely revolutionary wing of socialism, the theory met with fierce opposition. Lenin never ceased to deride it. As late as November 1915, he was slashing at Trotsky, quote, who repeats his original 1905 thesis without stopping to think why life during the whole decade was passed by this beautiful theory. Assuming example, incorrect, or what limits Trotsky's confusion goes. Lenin believed that the revolution in Russia would be a democratic revolution, though he as confidently as Trotsky expected that it would unloose the socialist revolution in Europe, without which, he stated, Over and over again, the Russian democratic revolution would collapse. Trotsky refused to concede an inch to the Mensheviks, who preached that the Russian bourgeoisie would lead the revolution. He said that the revolutionary character of their ideas would show itself before the revolution. To the Bolsheviks, who taught that the proletariat would destroy Tsarism, but install a bourgeoisie in power, he said that the counter-revolutionary character of their theory would appear after the revolution. The years have justified him. The Russian Revolution followed his road. After it came the post-war revolution in Germany, Austria, in Hungary and Turkey, and Italy, in Egypt, in India, in China, in Spain. The Russian and other proletarian nationalist revolutions have shaken the structure of capitalism. By 2-4 political thinkers attributed it all to, quote, the war, as if the war fell from the sky and was not itself a product of capitalist disintegration, as if Lenin, long before 1914, had not watched the growing industrialization of India and China and predicted the coming proletarian struggle in those countries. But for these upheavals, the socialist revolution in Russia would have been annihilated. True, the socialist cause has suffered a succession of defeats, but the struggle is not over. In every chancellerio in the world, Stalin included the specter of communism growing to Arabian Nights proportion set at every conference. Read the bourgeois press carefully, always between the lines, and sometimes in them snarls that the fear that the coming years will see the consummation of the audacious theory put forward by the young Marxist 35 years ago, Trotsky's creative power. The theory of the permanent revolution was no isolated sprint of inspiration, an abstract creative imagination, a range of thought. Trotsky assailed Lenin. Today we accept the idea of a single economic plan as a indispensable part of socialist organization of society. Trotsky first put it forward in his little history of the Russian Revolution, written during spare moments of the Litovsky. Lenin at first proposed it as he proposed the theory of the permanent revolution, but that most realistic of men, though often wrong, was never wrong for long in the face of reality, and soon he recognized the value of the single economic plan as opportunely as he had accepted the permanent revolution in April 1917. Besides the theory with which his name will always be associated, the outstanding example of Trotsky's analytic and creative power was the new course, the outgrowth and flowering of a single plan proposal. It is characteristic of him that, immersed in his work, he never saw the dangerous growth of the bureaucracy until Lenin, with the agonized urgency, pointing it out to him and asking for help. Lenin's immediate preoccupation was to take the political and the practical steps necessary to break up Stalin and his clique. Here, Trotsky failed completely. We shall deal with that. But in the course of a few months, he outlined a course of action which is one of the most profound and masterly plans of reconstruction ever laid before the rulers of the state in crises. A succession of good harvests was dangerously increasing the weight of the peasantry in capitalism. Unless checked, this would lead inevitably to the overwhelming of the proletariat and the Soviet power. The last great turn Lenin had given to the party had been towards the appeasement of the peasantry, but the retreat had gone far enough. It was necessary to embark on a bold plan of industrialization, collectivization in proportion to the strengthening of industrialization. should be the aim. Inseparably intertwined with the industrial was the political recognition, reorganization. He analyzed the dangers of bureaucracy, its causes and consequences, the relations of the youth to the old party comrades, the role of the masses in maintaining the revolutionary morale and integrity of the party. He called for the systematic education of the peasantry in the aims of the Soviet power. He set the whole against the background of the struggle for world socialism under the leadership of Communist International. It is one of the classic documents of the socialist literature. Socialism in a single country is impossible, but Victor Serge, who knew Russia well, has drawn attention to what would have been the result of such a program, not only in Russia, but among the peasants' millions in Central Europe. With Lenin's authority and political skill, which Trotsky so sadly lacked, such a plan would have altered the whole history of Russia and the world. Trotsky fought for it for 5 years, and it received its final and most perfect expression in the platform of left opposition. It was only in 1929 that Stalin, having brought Soviet Russia to the brink of disaster, adopted some part of it and carried them out with a brutality and exaggeration. Hold on, I gotta make sure. I always mess this word up all the fucking time. And when I'm gonna hear it, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, watch.
Exaggeration.
Yeah, I thought so. It's just the two G's. Oh my gosh, I can't say it now.
Exaggeration.
Exaggeration of the third period. Today, the Russians' 5-year plans, the New Deal, Roosevelt's new course, the Goring 4-year plan, Petain's 3-year plan, all are the mishaps, offsprings, consciousness and unconsciousness of the ideas contained in the new course. But in the multifarious writings, which expounds these experiments, nowhere appears a hint of a comprehensive grasp of society as a whole, the political penetration, the breadth, and the humanity that are contained within the pages of that slender volume, which is concerned more with the political approach than the actual economic plan. What is there to be done? The State and Revolution and Imperialism are Lenin's greatest books. All analytical, all profound as they are, compact of determination for immediate action. Trotsky's result and prospect, in which it contained the theory of the permanent revolution and his new course, though written in the heat of action, broaden out, and first on the international and the second on the national scale, into the perspectives of the future. Here he was excelled by only 2 men in history, Marx and Engels, and by them only because they covered so much ground that they limited the range of all successors. Lenin's successor. With the death of Lenin, the primary responsibility for Marxist analysis of contemporary events developing upon Trotsky, he tells us himself that he had learnt from Lenin, and the evidence is clear in his work, to this faculty of his syntheses of seeing history from a height. He had by now added a closer coordination between the general line of development and the immediate practical conclusion to be drawn at the different stages, though he never attained Lenin's superb mastery in this field. How deeply had he absorbed the lessons of the Russian Revolution, and Lenin's method is visible in his analysis of the Chinese Revolution, not so much in his problem of the Chinese Revolution as in the essay in the Third International after Lenin. There is, as always, the same wide sweep of comprehensive generalization, but here is also a precision, a definiteness, and a certainty in the handling of the specific problems which are absent from the pre-October works. The chief weaknesses of the presentation of the theory of the permanent revolution, the slurring over of the bourgeois democratic stage, as brilliantly corrected. We do not propose to give here any connect to or complete account of Trotsky's work. Trotsky wrote on all the great issues on the day, turned them inside out, so that students of his writings have a cinematic x-ray into the physiology and anatomy of 20th century society. But some examples of his mature methods must be given in any evaluation of his place in history. The first that springs to mind is that of the Soviet bureaucracy. Despite the differences which developed between Trotsky and the Workers' Party in the very last year of his life, despite unceasing criticism of his methods and his conclusions from all quarters, the fact remains that over the years there is simply no analysis of the Soviet Union worth bothering about except his own. It is a lesson in Marxism to read not only Trotsky but also educated opinions on the Soviet Union from 1917 to the present, the howls of coming disasters of the NEP, and the struggle for left opposition. When Trotsky was exiled to Turkey, the London Times said that Stalin had sent him there to organize a revolt in the Near East. The colossal sneers at the platform of Trotsky's plan for industrialization, to be followed by bulging eyes and hyperbole at Stalin's fabricated statistics. Sidney and Patrice Webb on Russia in 1923, and then in 1933. Louise Fisher and Vincent Sheen, the thousands of trained observers who went to Moscow and saw for themselves through Stalin's spectacles. Barbus and Romain Rolland, the bourgeois intellectuals of the Moscow trials, those clumsy, brazen, incredible, impudent falsifications which were indeed exceeded in unintelligence only by the comments of the intelligentsia. As one looks back in Trotsky's writings on the one hand and the rows of dustbins on the other, one realizes what it is to be a Marxist in these days. But there are Marxists and Marxists. In the revolutionary Marxist movement, his writings on Russia stand alone. For we are still without, perhaps shall be forever without, the work of Rekovsky or Sonovetsky. These are horrible. I did it horribly. And other persecuted by Stalin. Outside of Russia, there is nothing. Many people oppose what Trotsky wrote. They had a brief importance only through opposition to him. This one opposes Trotsky in 1934 on this point. Another opposes him in 1936 on that. But a connected body of comprehensive thought in opposition, it does not exist. This, the stronger part of his theoretical work, is, however, so closely intertwined with the struggle for the Fourth International that it can be treated adequately only in a special article, or rather a series of articles. It is more convenient and more opportune to illustrate Trotsky's role after his expulsion from Russia by his analysis of the rise and victory of German fascism. To read those half-dozen slandered volumes today is to wonder how a voice so strong and so clear should have cried in the wilderness, the first four congresses of fascism. He did not start. Now, there's some people said that Trotsky has a good analysis of fascism. So there are some books that other people have read that give like credence to Trotsky, like his views on fascism. You know what I mean? He did not start from scratch. The first four Congress of the Communist International, in which he took so preponderant a pair, laid the foundation for all future analysis of the economic politics of our age. The platform of the Communist International, 1919, in its second paragraph, repeated the and then familiar thesis of Lenin: monopoly supplants free competition. The isolated capitalist and transformed into the member of a capitalist association. Organizations replaced wild anarchy. For the first Congress, there is an insistent reiteration of the tendency to complete stratification of all aspects of society by the imperialist state. The manifesto of the Congress laid down the line. If the absolute subjection of the political power to finance capital has led humanity to the imperialist butchery, this butchery has given finance capital the chance not only to militarize the state completely, but to militarize itself in such a manner that it can continue to fulfill its economic functions only by fire and blood. The military state that Lenin called the vast state, capitalism, military, trust, and syndicates was the ultimate to which capitalism was moving. These states would inevitably seek wholesale military decisions of a violent nature. It was from there that Lenin and Trotsky began, while all the Democrats quarreled about parliamentary democracy and the League of Nations of Germany parliamentary democracy, specifically the Second Congress of 1920, said that, quote, it is merely a gap between two dictatorships. It would be no parliamentary dictatorship. The second Congress, using its eyes, pointing out that besides the capitalist state, other counter-revolutionary organizations of a private character formed under its aegis and places at its disposal, work to put a violent end to strikes, to commit provocations, to bear false witness, to destroy revolutionary organization, to do away with communist institutions, to massacre and to set afire, to take measures to defend private property and democracy. The personnel of these bandits consisted of, quote, the sons of big proprietors, big bourgeoisie, petty bourgeoisie, who do not know what to do with themselves, and in general, declassed elements. The 20,000 officers of the Hohenzollern army, those counter-revolutionaries, would be destroyed only by, quote, the smashing hammer of the dictatorship of the proletariat. This was in 1920. In that year, the great masses were following the Communist Party. But in 1921, the revolutionary wave had subsided. And at the Third Congress came the theses on the United Front. In 1922, Italian fascism took over, and at the Fourth Congress in 1923, a section of a resolution on tactics analyzed the dangers of fascism. Quote, legal methods of constraining no longer are sufficient for the bourgeoisie. The fascists are not only fighting organization, mainly counter-revolutionary and armed to the teeth, but they try by means of social demagogy to create for themselves a base among the masses, in the peasantry, and in the petty bourgeoisie, and even in certain parts of the proletariat, utilizing abhorrently for their own counter-revolution is the disillusionment provoked by the so-called democracy. It can't happen here and can only happen there. Lenin and Trotsky knew that, barring the socialist revolution, it is going to happen everywhere. The Fourth Congress stated that there was a danger of fascism among the countries besides Italy. It would happen in Germany and, quote, under one form or another. Fascism is no longer impossible in countries like France and England. Such was the leadership that the great Bolsheviks gave to the international proletariat. Today, one has to listen to solemn and presumptuous, unintelligent people who will tell you that Marxism has failed or is lacking in understanding of the modern world. We may pass them by. Lenin stopped work in March 1923, 1 year after Stalin, having seized the power, informed the world that social democracy and fascism were twins. One can appreciate, therefore, the motives of those who use the name of Marx complacently asked, quote, "What differences would it have made to Russia if Trotsky had won in the struggle with Stalin? We shall soon see what differences it would have made in the German proletariat. Behind the sham determination of their determinism, these enemies of Bolshevism conceal a genuine determination to defend bourgeois society. The menace of Schmittler." Such as the basic analysis, therefore, when in the September 1930 elections in Germany, Schmittler vote jumped from 800,000 in 1928 to 6 million. Trotsky, in exile in Turkey, was immediately on the alert. He knew at once that millions are now learning in blood and suffering and death. We do not propose to spend time here on the Stalinist crimes and responsibilities of that period. What we want to recall is that the Marxist method in the hands of a great master applied to the social crisis which has since grown so that it dominates the world. Writing after the September election, Trotsky indicated the menace which Schmittler represented and called upon the communists to stop their attacks on social democracy as twin of fascism and to struggle for the united front. But in the course of the following months, Stalin held the Communist Party of Germany to its course and in August 1931 forced it, against its own wishes, to form an alliance with the fascists against the Social Democrats. Social democracy in its turn preached an abiding faith in one God, democracy, with Brunelling as its prophet. Later, they would exchange Brunelling for Hindenburg. More than any other living being, Trotsky saw the whole frightful catastrophe which loomed, and in November 1931, he finished his first great document on fascism, Germany, the key to the international situation. He called it, quote, "hastily sketched reflections." There was no false modesty here. He merely wrote down that seemed to him the crying obviousness of the situation. He began with the Spanish Revolution, which was then 8 months old, how the pseudo-Marxists and the liberal Democrats beat the air when Schmittler and Mussolini intervened in Spain. Trotsky began his essay on Germany with Spain, where he sees the struggle is likely to be of a more or less protracted character. England also shows the possibility of years of partial ebbs and flows. France occupies a secondary role in world economics with immense privileges and pretensions in the world politics. This contradictions will heap danger upon danger and upset the internal stability of France. In America, the economic crises had laid bare frightful social contradictions. At the first sign of the rise of economic depression, the trade union movement acutely feel the necessity of tearing itself loose from the claws of the despicable AF or of L bureaucracy. Here is the CIO predicted. American capitalism itself will enter an epoch of monstrous imperialism, uninterrupted growth of armaments, of interventions in the affair of the entire world, of military conflicts and convulsions. Japan's venture in China can lead to revolution in Japan, for the Chinese, despite their weakness, will always improvise new armies. This is the background on which stands out in bold relief to the situation in Germany. On the solution of the German crises hangs the fate not only of Germany but of Europe and the entire world. Socialist construction in the USSR, the revolution in Spain, the fate of France and Britain, China and India, the development of the working class movement in America. All this rests, quote, directly and immediately on whose will be victorious in Germany, fascism or communism. The Communist Party said Trotsky must announce the danger, must unite the working class by the struggle for the united front with the Social Democratic Party leaders. It must lead the international proletariat and the Red Army now in advance. Fascism can come into power only after a merciless, annihilator civil war to the bitter end. I'm gonna look up this word. I hate this when I do this. So, like, the one thing he's like we that people do agree with is he knew his fascist stuff. He had a good analysis of fascism. Oh, that's what I miss. Okay, come on. Ah, of course it won't let me do a cause relating to complete and utter destruction. Fucking figures. I am not gonna do this. On me, on Lu T. Okay. Civil war to the bitter end. German Communist Party. The German Communist Party had at one period over 300,000 members. It was more than enough. But instead of seeking united front, Stalin's minions declared every minute of the day that the social democracy, not Schmittler, was the main enemy. They were counseling a retreat. Let Schmittler come to power. After will be our turn. After will be our turn. They got that from Stalin, who did not want to be bothered with any German revolution. It was in response to this that Trotsky uttered a warning, which is the most poignant in all the historical literature of our times, and day by day rolls louder in our ears. The coming into power of the German, quote, National Socialist would mean above all the extermination of the flower of the German proletariat, the distribution of its organization, the extirpation of its belief and in itself, its future, considering the far greater maturity and the acuteness of the social contradictions of Germany. The hellish work of Italian fascism would probably appear as a pale and almost humane experiment in comparison with the work of the German National Socialist. Retreat, you say, you who were yesterday the prophet of the third period. Leaders and institutions can retreat, individual persons can hide, but the working class will have no place to retreat to in the face of fascism, and no place where to hide. If one were really to assume the monstrous and improbable to happen, that the party will actually evade the struggle and thus deliver the proletariat to the mercy of its mortal enemy, this would signify only one thing: the gruesome battles would unfold not before the seizures of power by the fascists, but after it. That is, under conditions 10 times more favorable for fascism and those of today. The struggle of the proletariat, taken unawares, disoriented, disappointed, and betrayed by its own leadership against fascist regimes, would be transformed into a series of frightful, bloody, and futile convulsions. 10 proletarian insurrections, 10 defeats, one on top of the other, could not debilitate and unfeeble the German working class as much as a retreat before fascism would weaken it at a given moment, when the decision is still impeding as to the question of who is to become masters in the German household. How to stop fascism. This is how you stop fascism. You vote. Just vote blue. Everybody just remember that. Just vote blue. I'm just kidding. The fascists consisted of the petite bourgeoisie, the new middle class, artisans, shopkeepers, and technical personnel, and intelligentsias, the impoverished peasantry. The 1,000 fascist votes equaled 1,000 communist votes on the scale of election statistics, but on the scale of revolutionary struggle, 1,000 workers in one big factory represent a force of 1,000 times greater than the 1,000 petty officers, clerks, their wives, and their mothers-in-laws. The great bulk of the fascists consist of human rubbish, away from the center of things, dependent upon newspapers, days old, and unable to feel the pulse of the masses, as he complained. Trotsky followed events as best as he could, and in the next 12 months produced a succession of articles which were like a series of powerful searchlights in the prevailing darkness. Never for one moment did Trotsky falter on the supposed division between different sections of the bourgeoisie and the possibility of a renewing, crushing Schmittler or controlling him. He based himself on the crises of German capitalism, which demanded that the bourgeoisie get rid of the workers' organizations to demolish all the defensive bulwarks of the proletariat and to uproot whatever was being achieved during the 3/4 of a century by the social democracy and the trade unions. German capitalism had reached that stage since 1918. He and Lenin had been awaiting it, and only the proletariat revolution could stop it. Look and learn if you can. Will there still be time? Monsieur Democrats, 1940, looked and learned. Trotsky wasted no breath in shouting imprecations. I don't know this word. We can try, but I don't think we got, no, we don't got anybody to give coins. Sorry. We don't have coins. No one wants to give coins. Imprecations of the fascist brutality and sadism, or making psychoanalytic research into Schmittler's ambition. He knew that the German capitalist economy needed in order to survive. It would be overthrown by the socialist revolution, or it would smash everything before it. In Germany and outside Germany, before Schmittler and after his rise to power, the fools of the wise men, some very exalted statesmen, indeed, besides the usual riffraff of bourgeois intellectuals, speculated on the control that would be exercised over Schmittler, on the pressure from the left, the balance of the center, and the restraint of the right. Trotsky kicked this out of the way almost without looking at it. What relationship would develop in the early days between Schmittler, Schlecher, and the center leaders is more important for them than it is for the German people. Politically, all the conceivable combinations which Schmittler signified the dissolution of the bureaucracy, courts off police, and army into fascism. It would take too long to detail how article by article he foresaw move after move and prescribed the course of action necessary to unite the Stalinists and the social democratic workers to common struggles against the fascist bands. Together, these workers had 40% of the vote. In actual struggle, they were overwhelmingly the strongest sections of the country. They controlled transport, production, and distribution. The transport workers could paralyze the small Reichswehr. Millions of workers were trained for war by their experience of 1914 and 1918. Schmittler on the outside world and the outside world. Oh, I got a scratch. There we go. On the international scale, he was, as usual, at his best. A special conference of the Communist International to place the crises before the revolutionary workers everywhere. A joint plan for coordination of Soviet and German industries to be worked out by German and Soviet engineers, with the participation of the German working class movement. A declaration by Stalin that, in view of the repeated expression and hostilities to the USSR by Schmittler, the Soviet government would consider Schmittler accession to power as a threat to its future existence and would mobilize the Red Army on the borders of Poland. Trotsky had done the same thing under similar circumstances in 1923. In 1923, the economic crises had every country by the throat. no more so than the new society of Italian fascism. A fierce bitterness against the imperialistic government burned in the hearts of millions of workers in every country. The revolution crackled in Spain, ready to blaze. A tremendous revolutionary ferment was shaking India. Never at any time was there less fear of capitalist intervention in revolutionary Germany. Of the success of the communist Germany, the bourgeoisie had no doubt. Doubt it left to the intellectual. Lloyd George said after Schmittler's coming to power that it was just as well for these Germans know how to manage their in Germany, the key to the international situation. He thought that it in the first period of its rule if victorious, German fascism would be the tool of France. But this and nearly all his other mistakes flowed from the consistent capacity to knowledge, perhaps even to himself, and full depravity of Stalinism. Abraham, he did not think it's possible that the Stalinists in Germany could capitulate so completely as they did. Who else thought so about the social democratic bureaucrats? He had no illusions. He knew and said in advance that their upper layers prefer the victory of fascism to the socialist revolution. When Wells, Liebhardt, and company offered their services to Schmittler, it was no surprise to Trotsky. Knowing the future that awaited Europe, he had to sit and watch the catastrophe unroll itself before him. He wrote rarely on bourgeois foreign policy. Every line was, "What's next? What next?" And the only road? And the two botcheries in which were collected the articles which follow Germany. The key to the international situation is addressed like 99% of his writings to the workers. They could stop fascism. Nobody else could. But some months after Schmittler came to power, he completed his analysis in the pamphlet, What Schmittler Wants. Schmittler had astonished the world by a most pacific speech, which followed on the bellicose piece of, oh my gosh, I don't know how to say this word. Oh my gosh, it's a word that I cannot say. We're talking about how Stalin failed in Germany, the Stalinist people failed in Germany to do the socialist revolution, because what he's saying is that the only way to stop fascism was through a socialist revolution. But of course, let's find out what this word is.
Rhodomontade.
Rhodomontade, boastful, arrogant, or pretentious, talking or behavior.
Rhodomontade.
Rhodomontade by von Pepin. Feel like the soothing lotion of Europe's troubled ears. Trotsky, with mathematical precisions, atomized Schmittler's foreign policy. The inevitability of the new conflict between Germany and France. His immediate aim to restore the military power of Germany and the use of Italy, but with the Italian crutched along German imperialism will not raise to its feet. The splitting of England from France by the coming of German departure from the League of Nations. England to be bribed by Schmittler, taking upon itself the protection of European civilization, of the Christian religion, of British colonies, and other moral and material values against Bolshevik barbarism. Schmittler is convinced that on the scale of Great Britain, the dangers of German fascism to Western Europe weighs less than the dangers of Bolshevik Soviets in the East. This evaluation constitutes the most important key to the whole foreign policy of Schmittler. Schmittler would strive to unite the vanquished nation, only the more pitilessness to crush them after, and the rearmament being accomplished. Should the east be difficult, the explosions might take place along the different directions. Quote, for it is still possible to discuss to what degree offensive means are distinguished from defensive means. Offensive means are distinguished from defensive means. It is already beyond dispute that the military means suitable for the East are equally suitable for the West. The essay ended with another warning. Europe needs a new organization. But woe betide it if this work falls into the hands of fascism. The historians of the 21st century would then have to write that the war of 1914, called the quote War of Democracy, soon led the triumph of fascism, which became the instrument of the deconstruction of Europe's economic and cultural organization. He hoped that the old continent had enough vital strength to open for itself the different historical road. This is a man who, 3 years afterwards, was accused by Stalin and Browder of being in alliance with Schmittler. The intellectuals read this and shook their heads and said, it is possible. He made only one serious error. He laughed to the scorn the idea of an alliance with Schmittler and Stalin, and that is a question that demands detail, treatment enough for the moment that Trotsky was writing in the summer of 1933. He knew then that Stalin had openly asked for an alliance in March, and Schmittler had refused. Soviet Union in 1933 was not the Soviet Union of 1939. Unintelligent and bourgeoisie scoundrels always emphasize Trotsky's personal brilliance, whereby they seek to disparage Trotsky's method. The two are inseparable. His natural gifts are trained and developed by Marxism, and he could probe those depths and understandings and ascend to these peaks of foresight because he based himself on a Marxist theory of the class struggle and the revolutionary predominant role of the proletariat in the crises of bourgeois society. The choice is still ours, Messieurs Democrats, the choice between fascism and socialism. And if you say that instead you choose democracy, then the lesson of the rise of German fascism is still lost upon you. Though you know very detail of German history since 1933 and can point out all the absurdities of Mein Kampf, the organizers. It is difficult. It is impossible to write about the career and achievements of the extraordinary man without the constant use of superlative. Whoever's here, we're reading about Trotsky a little bit. I'm not a Trotskyist. I do not call myself one, but I'm wanting to know the views. We're reading about C.L.R. James, but C.L.R. James moved away from Trotsky. Superlative, the highest attainable degree of quality in something. Superlative. And yet, there are rigidly and soberly applicable. Marx and Engels were the guiding spirit of the First International, but their work was largely literary, the exposition of ideas. In that field, Lenin and Trotsky continued and developed on foundations which had been well and truly laid. But history prevented Marx and Engels from being men of action on the grand scale. Trotsky was a theoretical writing apart. His theoretical writings apart belong to that small company of human beings who have been instruments in assisting the new worlds into be born. We have no need to detail the leadership of the Russian Revolution, which earned him a title of the Man of October, or his organization of the Red Army. What we have to do in order to get the approximate evaluation of his historical significance is to compare his role with that of other great political figures at similar historical crises. The Russian Revolution is the greatest revolution in history, and among the political events which have been decisive in altering the course of human society. Come what may, it takes high place. As we look back over the history of Western civilization, we can see the high spot that the German Reformation, the 30-Year War, which ruined Germany and laid the basis for modern Europe, an English Revolution, the First American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Boulevard liberation of Latin America, the American Civil War. There are others, and there is scopes for arguments, but the uncontestable that each of these marks the beginning of a new epoch in human relations. The dynastic war of the 18th century, even such a war of the Franco-Prussians, shrank into insignificance as times march on. It did not extensively matter to the world who conquered India, the British or the French, but it was a matter of life and death to Western civilization. Rather, the North conquered the South, or vice versa, in the American Civil War. It is not spleen that makes Schmittler foam at the mouth when he speaks of the Northern victory. The success of the Russian Revolution ushered in a period of crises for Western civilization, such as never existed before since the 3rd century of the Roman Empire. In this time, not only Western civilization, but the fate of the world is at stake. Among the men who played the decisive parts of these historic climax, Trotsky easily takes his place as one of the foremost. He is not in the very first rank. Cromwell and Lenin stand towering above all others. Lenin's organized the Bolshevik Party, was the strategist of October, and again saved the revolution. Cromwell was an indispensable statesman, a soldier as well. But Marat was a journalist and agitator of genuine, and that was all he did. Rosenspeyer was a politician. Dayton was a politician, but his chief contributions was his tactical leadership of the revolution. Washington was a soldier, and many of the politics of the American Revolution was the other and more capable hands. Lincoln had enormous advantages of always being in control of the state power. He had neither to overthrow nor to build. Trotsky, on the other hand, was second in command of those who planned the greatest overthrow of the existing order recorded in history. During the crucial months of the tactical decisions on which depended success or failure were entirely in his hands. War and revolution are the two greatest social crises. At this great businesses of leading a revolution, he showed himself a great master. All the more because 20 years before he had correctly disentangled the main motive forces and directions of the revolution. He mastered tactics best who most profoundly master strategies. As if that were not enough, he proceeded almost overnight to show himself one of the greatest war ministers in history. Any historical studies or analysis of war and armies must of necessity give a high, in some respects, a unique place to Carnot, the organizer of victory. But Carnot was no politician. He was a trained army officer. Trotsky's previous to the revolution, having done his share of the work done by Rousseau, Voltaire, and Mobley, then turned to the revolution to do the work of Dayton, immediately dropping that to do the work of Carnot. All this on the scale infinitely surpassing the limitations of the 18th century France at the helm of the revolution, which directly changed the lives of over 150 million people. The administration that administered a shock of society, the echoes of which are still reverberating in the remotest corners, prickly and poisonous as are such analogies to handle. Yet they are indispensable in arriving at any conclusion to the historical stature of the great actor of a human on the human stage. But by these or any other standards, on the conclusion merges. Trotsky was one of the most powerful agents of social dynamics, who was who has lived in this or in any other time. So they're giving him kudos for the analysis on fascism, and kudos for being for helping the Red Army assemble into the successes of the revolution. So there's some things he did correct. He helped out a lot, but other things, yeah, which was mentioned I think earlier about like the black question and other things that are just revisionists. You know, the man of ideas. Here is a list of achievements which can be challenge comparison with that of most men in history, even without our taking into the account of history of the Russian Revolution. There's no need to dilate on his intellectual and physical endowments, his iron self-discipline, his devotion. And yet this guy sounds like he's like, to me, this guy sounds like he's great manning fucking Trotsky, which is like, stop doing it. And yet his superbly gifted theoretician executives, the leader of men on the grand scale who achieved so much in the realm of politics, was a very defective politician. We do not refer to the fact that he had built no organizations of importance before 1905. There was no room for a second Bolshevik party in Russia. Lenin might be wrong on the imminence of the socialist revolution in Russia, but his party was a proletarian party, and Trotsky, who repudiated the Mensheviks doctrine and the Bolshevik practice, was of necessity left in a no man's land of small dimensions. Two Bolshevik parties in any country at the same time is impossible. Nor do we refer to the weakness of the Fourth International, to which he devoted his last years. It is possible to differ from Trotsky on some of the organizational conflicts of the Fourth International during the last period, and yet it is easy to recognize from what they are. Those who place the responsibility for the smallness of our forces on him and his method and his weaknesses. They are for the most part disgruntled backsliders, or people looking for excuses to get out of the movement. But recognition of his genius does not preclude the obvious fact that 1905 found him outside of an organization. 1917 found him again without an effective organization in which to function in 1923 at the greatest crises of his career. Though he was, after Lenin, the most famous and popular leader of Russia in the party among the proletariat and among the peasantry, Trotsky found himself pushed out of power as if he were a fourth-rate bureaucrat. It was Trotsky's reputation with the great masses of the people that Stalin and his friends of the moment feared the systematically destroyed. Actual power Trotsky had none. Second raters like Zinoviev and Kamenevy were rooted and one of the Leningrad Soviets, the other in the Moscow Soviets. Stalin. Okay, here we go. Sorry. See where we're at? All right, we're good. Hey, I guess bulk. Oh, maybe bulking. Maybe I'm just not getting people in. Who knows? Stalin had to do a deal of digging to get them out. Trotsky was rooted nowhere, not even in the army he had built from the ground up. No sooner was Lenin ill than Trotsky's power in the party was seen for what it was, a glittering shell. Such failures were not due to superficial characteristics. If they were, a man of his devotion and his will would have conquered them. They were organic, and his work is not fully comprehensible without seeing them as an essential part of the man he was and the thing he did. The weakness was not all on the debit side. Let us look at his style, for words were his greatest weapon. As a man of action, he expressed himself always amply, completely, and with care, writing and rewriting. Man of action though he was, the whole of him is contained in his books. the false way in which the chairman of the Soviet District Committee approaches the kulak as only a small link in the chain whose largest link are constituted by the attitude of the red trade unions towards the general councils of the British Trade Union Congress, or of the central committees of the CPSU towards Chiang Kai-shek and Purcell. How magnificent is it? Range of precision, but above all range. These and similar superb generalizations are scattered all over his works. He could bring the whole world situation to bear upon the single point he was discussing. Here is a longer example. Oh my gosh. Caesarism, or its bourgeois form, Bonapartism, enters the scene in those moments of history when the sharp struggle of two camps raising the state power to seek above the nation the guarantee and guarantees it. Its appearance a complete independency of the classes. In reality, only the freedom necessary for the defense of the privilege. The Stalin regime, rising above the political atomized society, resting upon a police and an officer corps, and allowing of no control over whatever, is obviously a variation of Bonapartism, a Bonapartism of a new type, not before seen in history. Caesarism arose upon the basis of the slave society, shaken by inward strife. Bonapartism is one of the political weapons of the capitalist regimes. It is critical periods. Stalinism is a variety of the same system, but upon the basis of a worker state, torn by the antagonisms between the organized and armed Soviet aristocracy and the unarmed toiling masses. As history testified, Bonapartism gets along admirably with a universal and even a secret ballot. The democratic ritual of Bonapartism is the plebiscite. From time to time, the question is presented to the citizens for or against the leader, and the voter feels the barrel of the revolver between his shoulders since the time of Napoleon III. Who now seems a provincial, delineated this technique, has received an extraordinary development. The new Soviet constitution, which establishes Bonapartism in a plebiscite basis, in the variable crown of the system. In the last analysis, Soviet Bonapartism owes its birth to the belatedness of the world revolution. But in the capitalist countries, the same cause gave rise to fascism. We thus arrive at the conclusion accepted at first glance, but the reality inevitably that the crushing of the Soviet democracy by the all-powerful bureaucracy and the extermination of bourgeois democracy by fascism were produced by one of the same causes, the dilatoriness of the world proletariat in solving the problems set forth by history, Stalinism and fascism, in spite of the deep differences of social foundations, are symmetrical phenomena. In many of their features, they show a deadly similarities. The victorious revolutionary movement in Europe would immediately shake not only fascism, but Soviet Bonapartism, and turning its back to the international revolution. The Stalinist bureaucracy was, from its own point of view, right. It was merely obeying the voices of self-preservation. The revolution betrayed. That's the book. I think that's Trotsky's book. One writer alone of modern times had the same range, Spengler. A horizon separated him from Trotsky in precision. We who know his work may perhaps be a little dulled by familiarity. What page, however, is the summary of 2,000 years of history, ending in judgment of two major phenomena of modern society, which are as startling as a picture suddenly flashed on a screen, and an I gotta look up this word. Come on, highlighted it. Okay. Incontrivable. I can't say it. Incontrovertible. Incontrovertible as a proof of geometry. Trotsky, man of action, was therefore above all an intellectual, a man of theory. Thus he was a man for whom ideas had far more reality than people. Vulgar minds like Louis Fisher says that he had his head in the clouds. There is just a germ of truth in it, but he was never dreaming or admiring himself. He was always conscious of the panorama of history, not an antiquarian. Can you look up this word? The words hate me today, everybody. Oh, no, I almost had it. That's antiquated. It's not right. Antiquarian. But in its bearing on the problem in hand. He said so. He deplored his weak memory for faces, but omitted his own memory for ideas. The sentence in his autobiography tells us as much. He has made still more revealing confessions. He says openly that for him, power was an inescapable burden. The prison the prison with a book or a pen in my hand. It's not person, it's prison. Yeah, I experienced the same sense of deep satisfaction that I did at the mass meetings of the revolution. Such a spirit is absolutely foreign to a genuine homo politicus. He even goes so far as to say that he found prison a perfect place for writing. It was so quiet there, so eventless, so perfect for intellectual work. It was the one place where he was certain not to be arrested. It is a joke, but a joke perfectly in harmony with his general approach to life. In the midst of one of the most difficult periods of the revolution, he had on his desk some of the latest books of science and chafed that he could find no time to read them. Joseph Stalin, we may be sure, was not worried at his ignorance of Einstein's theory. After the October Revolution, when Lenin asked him what position he wanted, he had never thought of it because he had always wanted to be a writer. That was his trend in mind. In the different age, he would not have been a politician at all. Compare Lenin, who never finished State and Revolution because it was his galley rights in the introduction. It was far more enjoyable to be going through a revolution than to be writing about it. Because like Lenin said that the State Revolution would be multiple volumes, but he couldn't finish it because something was kicking off. Lenin, it is known, loved conventions, conflicts over resolution, the wear and tear of hurly-burly of political strife. Trotsky, it is clear, hated them. He would have preferred to be elsewhere, at his desk. His political work was a duty. He saw the moving forces of history and played his part, conscious that it was a great part. He was glad to be able to give so much in a struggle where gifted men are so few. He would throw his cloak about his shoulders in superb style as when, at a difficult moment in history, he remarks, "It seems easier at times to have captured Petrograd in 1917 than to write the history of the event." How his small, bright blue eyes would have gleamed just before he said it. But in this consciousness of himself, there was not the slightest meanness or conceit. His writings against Stalin were evidence. There is rage and indignation at the degradation of the Russian Revolution, but there is not one line, not a comma, a personal bitterness. The confinement irked him, but he was as happy at his desk in Cancun as he was in the Kremlin. It was true, too true, too true. He loved learning, knowledge, theory for their own sake. Whereas Lenin, more learned and more profound than Trotsky, loved them for the sake of the revolution. He could not resist a theoretical disquisition. What constitutes the essence of dual power? We must pause upon this question, for illumination of it has never appeared in historical literature. There follows a rather lengthy digression in the history, and feeling guilty, he is at pains to assure the reader at the end of his patience it will be worth it. It may seem as though this theoretical inquiry has led us away from the events of 1970. In reality, it led us right into the heart of them, only from the theoretical heights as it is possible to observe it fully and correctly understand it. At the tensest moments of revolution and war, he was always looking at events from the theoretical height. Stalin, his rival, never ascended to any theoretical height. He was always crawling down below, and to the successful politicians must learn to grub. Man of feelings. I don't like how he makes this guy great man him. He's just he's the most brilliant person. I don't like it. I don't like that part. That is one key to Trotsky's character in his work. Another was his attitude up to the masses. He had a passionate faith in them, and no great work for socialism, theoretical or practical, can be done without it. On one occasion, he spoke of them with the unsurpassable dignity and restraint. Mr. Attorney, he told Finnerty during the session of Dewey Commission, France and Great Britain are not my allies. They can be the allies of the Soviet state. My allies are the workers of all countries, and only allies I recognize are the workers of all the other countries. My politics are established not for the purpose of diplomatic conventions, but for the development of the international revolutionary movement of the working class. I cannot put hopes on the allies of the Soviet Union. In France and England, they can betray one another. They can separate from one another. But I am sure that the workers, who understand very well the situation, they will be free, and they will win 100 workers, and the 100 workers 1,000 soldiers. They will be victorious at the end of the war. It seems to me very simple, but I believe it is a good idea. Nice. But though he had no illusions about them, his general attitude was one of explosive indignation at their oppression and suffering. Workers to the shops. Such is an ironclad egoism of the educated class, liberals and socialists alike. These people believe that millions of workers and soldiers lifted to the heights of insurrection by the unconquerable pressures and discontent and hope would after their victory tamely submit to the old condition of life. Okay, hold on. I'm going to go ahead. 121. Looking ahead. Oof. It doesn't look good. Hold on. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Yeah, 4 more pages. 121. Thank you. France and Great Britain. No, wait, I already read that one. Sorry. I already read that one. Moreover, once history refers to the freedom from drudgery of the domestic servant, in many passionate outbursts in the history of one of the most remarkable is the description of the horny hands of hoarse voices of the Paris workers intruding themselves on the political stage, where the the Sulcan gentlemen are settling the fate of the nation. His chapter on the revolution and the autobiography are instilled with a hot sympathy for the masses, is often the characteristics of the gifted intellectual, and particularly of a man who are somewhat aloof from their fellows. It is the chief ingredient in the complex of psychological traits which make the great mass orator. You can feel it in every page of Berkue and Domethestes, I can't say his name, but neither of these were great politicians in the small sense of the word. Most young men have it. Lead men to accomplish the impossible, but a certain tendency to rashness goes with it. With all his self-discipline, Trotsky feelings could outrun his discretions. To demonstrate the contrast, read Lenin's writings. There is the same passion, but it is controlled. Rage at Mensheviks, the petty bourgeoisie, radicals. Yes, but outbursts of moral indignation and outrage, sympathy, are singularly few. But if he was never the orator that Trotsky was, he was never the man to be swept off his feet. He lost his head once, only once, and that in a personal question. I'm going to stop there. Page 122. I don't like how he's making him like the best ever. There's no critique, I feel like. Hardly any critiques. It sounds like he puts this person on puts Trotsky on a pedestal. Now people can say that Trotsky's on the Russian Revolution was good, and his views on fascism so far, that's what I've heard, is good. So, oh my gosh, I got a visual restriction right when I'm done? Come on. Come on. Yeah, he's definitely great manning him. There's definitely a great man there. Definitely. I agree. Definitely great manning. I don't like great manning. I hate it. I used to do it all. I still kind of do it, but I don't do it as much. See here. I'm going to look at something here real quick. Trotsky, a beast though. Haters gonna hate. Yeah, I can see he does have some good things in him, but you know what I mean. It'd be great to go back and see like the whole thing between Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin, just to see what happened. You know what I mean? Just to see what happened. Just to have a better outlook. You know? So I don't know. It kind of feels like a lot of the things about Trotsky are hidden too at the same time. I don't know. But like again, like we shouldn't detract from reading things like this. And I think that's the problem with, especially online, is everybody falls into this like this whole thing that it's taboo to read from Trotsky when we have prominent theoreticians, prominent revolutionaries like George Jackson and all these other people who have read Trotsky and not become Trotskyists. Like, I don't get it. Great manning is hard to avoid. Yes, when our society values individuals such, yeah, but great manning also keeps you from the critique too, because you see that person as not doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? So you see that great manning shit doesn't help because all of them are men of flaws. You know what I mean? So like my thing is I'm working on learning how to do an internal critique, especially of my favorite ones. You know what I mean? My favorite theoreticians. So, but like, this is, you know, the only thing I say is the great manning thing. But like getting a different perspective on the side that I'd never read before is interesting. It's interesting, and I don't know what to do with it yet. Ignore the flaws? Yeah, I don't think we should ignore the flaws. Honestly, I think the flaws help us to advance in our development and understanding. I think flaws show us how that moves and what makes it a flaw and what could have been like implemented better or adjusted. You know what I mean? I think flaws are good because even, like I said, Lenin said that too. Like, we hope they take our flaws in our revolution and build off those and make better decisions, from our mistakes and our flaws. You know what I mean? But man, they pinpoint Stalin as this, like, basically like parallel to Schmittler. And I don't know if I agree with that completely, honestly. Like, I agree with the bureaucracy. I agree with like the deviation from Leninism. I do agree with him losing the international character and becoming more of a nationalistic like thing when they didn't need nationalistic things, I don't think. And like there has been like things like in the book I'm reading that he stopped giving aid to like some African countries for their revolutionary progress. So like I don't know. I do have like and like his like bad analysis of like of saying like the commodity form has been done and stuff like that. I don't know. I still need to read more. I probably should read Stalin himself, But yeah. But anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and close it out. I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you for being here and listening, at least. The next book, I'm thinking about doing a Fanon book. What would be a great read? I don't know. I hear that his thing on the Russian Revolution is pretty good. And I hear like his thing on fascism, he had a correct analysis of it. You know what I mean? I would say also read what he means by the permanent revolution, because I think there's a different type of character that like I think Marx and Engels took on it. I don't know, but yeah. I was thinking about reading his Alienation, but I think it's written by someone else, but it's based on Fanon. We'll see what it does. I'm gonna drop. yeah. But C.L.R. James is good. He's pretty good. Alienation. I'm reading Marx's manuscripts on alienation right now. It's pretty interesting. It's not so technical, and it's a little bit on humanism, because Marx ended up not being a humanist, and that's different than like, oh, humans are good. I don't know exactly what the humanist anti-humanist thing is. Honestly, I think it's to not put morals and shit like that on the things. I'm not sure. I have to figure that out. But yeah, so like. I don't see people that say that things are taboo. Fucking read them. Just read them. Come up with your own conclusions and shit. But anyways, yeah, post-humanism is a thing. Yeah. All right, everybody. I know you came in. I'm just closing down Make America Go Away, but I'm going to go ahead and close it out. I appreciate everybody. Thank you.